Globalization is having a major impact on your identity right now, whether you realize it or not. We all have an individual identity and a collective identity, and both of these identities can be changed due to the forces of globalization. As was discussed in the previous video, some people feel that this global impact is making us more accepting of differences and providing us with so many more experiences. Just think of how global the food court is at the mall. So many wonderful foods from all around the world. But other people are concerned that we're also losing some of our traditions and that this interconnected world is just becoming like one big American shopping mall. They worry that their culture will disappear. For example, my husband is British, and on a recent visit home, we found it hard to locate a traditional fish and chip shop because many of them had been replaced by restaurants selling Indian food. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Indian food, but he was a bit sad to see this traditional British neighborhood had changed so much. He felt a loss of his identity or relationship to his homeland. So, what is a collective versus an individual identity? As an individual Canadian, I can wear Canada mittens or post a picture from a Canadian park on social media or support a Canadian musician that I like. All of this can show not only my own identity, but also that I'm very proud Canadian, which is part of my collective identity. Of course, it's not just globalization that impacts our identity. Your family can be a huge influence on your identity, as well as the media you watch. Often your family and the media are a reflection of the culture you live in. Your culture includes the language you speak, the foods you eat, and what you do for fun, even the music you like. It also includes the values towards things like gender equality and the relationship we should have with the environment. We develop our identity from the people who are closest to us, as these are the people that teach us language and cultural expectations like don't pick your nose. The language you're taught as a child has a way of creating the window through which you see the world. We call this your ideology. Every language has different ways of seeing the world. For example, in Spanish, there are many ways to say I love you. Your family or community can also impact how you see your role in the world. For example, marginalized groups, which are people who haven't been treated fairly, whether that's because they have a different skin color or gender or religion, can sometimes pass on to their children that the world is against them and they should be quick to take offense. This can then perpetuate violent reactions that we can often see around the world. And yet, those same circumstances can be used to teach children to be patient, kind, and understanding of others to promote the peaceful societies that also exist around the world. The government can impact our identity. Often, the support or opposition to a government program will strengthen collective identities. Governments can also work to promote ideas, whether it's the promotion of cultural values or the protection of the environment. And this leads us to the influence of your relationship with the environment. This can be a tricky subject here in Alberta. Whether you see the environment as something that's useful for our economy or something that must be preserved is going to influence how you react to different government proposals and even ideas from your family or friends. Religion or spirituality can also be a sensitive subject for some. For others, it's an important aspect of their lives that strengthens their individual and collective identity. Less industrialized or technologically advanced cultures are often much more traditional. People act the same as the generation before them, and religion has a major role to play in everyday life. But you live in a developed nation that's changing all the time. Your generation's confusing to older generations because we never had the access to technology that you have. Your world is changing so quickly and we just don't understand you. So globalization is impacting family relationships, which is a key part of our identity. There are many different ways you can express your individual or collective identity. Your language is a key aspect of your identity because, as I've already said, it's the way we interpret our world and communicate our ideas to others. I'm a Canadian, but I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm not bilingual. This impacts my identity. Your identity can also be expressed through art, your clothing, participation in religious traditions, whether that's a formal institution like a church or personal actions like meditation. You can encourage others around you to be more charitable or environmentally conscious, which is an expression of your ideology. The simple actions we take every day, along with some of the big decisions we make, are expressions of our individual and collective identity, like posting on social media something you care about and want others to care about as well. So let's talk a little bit about the Canadian collective identity. In Social 20, you're going to look at what it means to belong to the nation of Canadians and how this is a very complex idea because we are pluralistic. We have many cultures and ideas that are supported, making it hard to pinpoint what it really means to be Canadian. And this is due to globalization, whether it's the historical global forces that brought European settlers to the Canadian landmass, or our modern immigration policies that encourage people to come to Canada from around the world. We were the first country to adopt a multiculturalism policy, and this is a key aspect of our identity. I find it kind of interesting that an old social textbook says that Canada was very diverse before European contact because there were so many different Aboriginal groups. But by the turn of the 20th century, Canada was less diverse because most of the citizens had come from Western Europe. While our government works to promote multiculturalism, it also tries to preserve a Canadian culture in the face of the increasing homogenization of cultures around the world. What do I mean by this? The homogenization of cultures means that we're all becoming the same. Media, especially US media, is so popular that it can cause us to ignore what makes our society unique. So in Canada, we have cultural content legislation. Have you ever heard of the CRTC? The Canadian Radio and Television Telecommunications Commission works hard to ensure that our Canadian identity doesn't get lost in the sea of global influences. That's why you'll hear a popular Canadian artist on the radio over and over and over again, because radio stations must play a certain amount of Canadian artists. The CRTC also seeks to control the internet and our phone companies. Do some research and see if you can find some recent news articles about the CRTC. Other countries also have similar cultural laws. For example, in France, there's a Minister of Culture who enforces laws such as 60% French content on TV and a focus on French films at the cinema. And in Australia, TV stations must show a minimum of 55% Australian content. Those laws were in 2016. The Canadian government also wants to protect the identity of specific groups within Canada. In a future video, we're going to discuss how the Canadian government is trying to preserve groups such as Francophones in Canada by passing laws to protect and promote their language. These linguistic rights will help to ensure our unique identity of being a bilingual country and that it will survive in a world where English is the dominant language. We will talk about laws like Bill 101 in a later video that are used to protect the French language. And with the support from the government, as well as private groups, there's programs to strengthen the identity of groups within Canada. So for example, many major universities now provide programs that study the history, language, and cultures of various Indigenous groups in Canada. Language is an essential part of any culture, and by teaching new generations how we speak a language, we can ensure that important cultures are not lost. This is known as linguistic revitalization. And it's not just national governments that are working to protect the cultural identities of their nation. Unesco is an international organization within the UN that focuses on promoting and preserving global cultures. Alberta has many UNESCO sites. Other international organizations include La Francophonie, which brings French-speaking nations together to support each other. And there's international legislation to promote the rights of Aboriginal peoples through the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights. In the next video, we're going to look at the opportunities and challenges created by globalization in more detail.